Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome to End of Dragons Daily. We're on part 58 today, and what I want to do is talk to you guys a little bit about some of the creatures that might appear in the continent, spotlight some of your ideas of things you guys would like to see, and for those out of the loop who don't know what the hell we're talking about, give you a little bit of background on what those things are. Also, my guess as to their likelihood as appearing, because here's the thing, for all the fun stuff that might be there, Cactus was very rich and had a lot of diverse and interesting creatures. I don't think the devs are going to pick them all. In fact, I don't even think the devs are going to pick a like super high proportion of them. So, you know, which they specifically go for is going to have to be quite precise. For that reason, I think the devs are going to be really careful. I also think, by the way, that's not just because like expansion crunch or whatever. I think that part of it is going to be because they want the freedom to make new things too. Like how in Path of Fire we had, you know, nearly every single mount was a completely new invention, a completely new type of creature. They're not entirely beholden to the previous game. I'm sure we'll see them do all kinds of fun things. So let's go through, and the footage in the background will be a little bit more stuff on my Rev, depending on how the rendering goes. I might do something kind of weird and fancy with the footage, we'll see, just to make it a little bit interesting. If the footage looks totally boring and normal, then fine as well. I actually spent another £90 yesterday on more RAM because I think it might help alleviate some of these instability issues further. And I'm trying with higher graphics today. I did have a crash while shooting some of it, but it's way less regular than it was, which is nice. All right, so enough preamble. First, we got Brandon, who says who's quoting me, saying there are monkey ideas everywhere, and I was talking about obviously the Guild Wars 1 profession monk. But he says, monkey elite spec when. Now, this is kind of only tangential to the topic, but I do want to raise the idea we might actually see something like this. We might see that they populate the Echovald forest with simian creatures. In theory, they could have done this for ages. There are actually lots of simians living around the Tarnished Coast, right near the Grove, right near Ratasum during Guild Wars 1's heyday. And we never saw them like re-implement them. I think that there's still kind of this big space. A POF was probably a great place to do it as well, especially if they had some more like rainforested or tropical ideas. Hell, even Heart of Thorns, all the expansions have had this space. I think that Cantha's also a viable candidate too because of this whole like Sun Wukong like monkey humanoid type thing. There's obviously that random weird tonic in Drytop that drops and looks like it's not really a part of lore and it was just kind of made by an intern or something. But it is a fun tonic and it is kind of got that East Asian inspiration behind it, and you might see they go a little bit deeper with it when we get to Cantha and you actually find out a little bit more about these guys. Maybe they're folded into the lore properly or something. There really wasn't anything in Guild Wars 1, but this is an example of a place where I think the devs might go somewhere new, if not, you know, looking at the Guild Wars 1 simians themselves. So, you know, don't reject it too much. The idea of an elite spec based on them, I'm not too sure. Next, we have West Tex, who also talks about the monkey things. It had me confused for a second. But they say, in Cantha, I liked the celestial creatures, the essence of Kirin, etc. And the mysterious Leviathans around the Jade Sea and the Island Guardians. So I already mentioned the Island Guardians. They're kind of like a species of, you know, semi-sentient plants, animated plants that wander around. The most exciting thing about them in Guild Wars 1 was that they were massive, and a Guild Wars 2 interpretation could make them even bigger further still. You know how Guild Wars 1's Oak Heart's pretty lame, and then in Guild Wars 2, Oak Hearts look amazing. They get a lot bigger and a lot more detailed, a lot more elaborate. Well, imagine a similar scale transformation from the Guild Wars 1's Island Guardians, which were already big, into what they might become later. That would be fantastic. So I'm a big fan of that. The Leviathans were these great sea serpent worms that you found frozen in jade, and in particular, in one of the elite missions, the Deep, there was a specific moment where one bursts out of a massive block of jade and tries to fight your team. If you guys remember by the end of today's video, you might want to look up on my channel my run-through and my lore discussion and story playthrough of the Deep, and you'll see that special moment where this thing comes out of this block of ice, and it's kind of an optional mini-boss in one of the, essentially, Guild Wars 1 equivalent raids. So, yes, I think we could see more of those. We've even seen already in Guild Wars 2, when they've had, like, this jade around, like the Dermond Priory archives, they have got these great serpents and things that are hidden within, and there's all kinds of great concept art. And finally, the celestial creatures. This is the main thing I want to talk about. I actually don't like the celestial creatures. There's kind of a really weird act, a very brief moment in Guild Wars 1, whereby you are undergoing this rite to essentially ascend, right? It's kind of like the Canthan version of ascension, and how exactly the two rituals of becoming Wayno Su close to the start and ascending are the same. Hopefully, End of Dragons we'll talk about a bit. But it's just really obscure and strange. You just end up like in the city, but it's night and the stars look crazy and there's these weird celestial entities wandering around all over the place, and they just don't dive into it that well. I think one of the festivals also had stuff with the celestials too. I'm just not too on board with it without more of a base of tangible lore to discuss around the celestial entities. And I appreciate that the topic of the celestials could be really interesting and important with the Guild Wars 2 view of the end of dragons and the end of the dragon cycle, and talking about bigger creatures and other entities of the universe, and are these somehow related to spirits of the wild and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not really that into them, to be honest, and they were essentially just weird reskins of existing creatures accompanied by Tengu. And I don't know what cool stuff ArenaNet could do with it. Of course, in the sequel game, we do have like the astral creatures. Like in Path of Fire, you drop down that massive dwarven mine into the dark area, and there's all these shiny astral sparkling things. They're kind of similar in a lot of ways. So maybe the devs can draw them together. The astral creatures of Guild Wars 2 are kind of a big enigma right now. You know, like the boss that you see in the Shattered Observatory, Astariv, or in the CM mode, it's Virastrava, or have I got those reversed? In any case, that race, maybe they can tie in. I'm not too sure. They did have a hint in POF, so maybe they're alluding to something. Next, we have Christmas Cactus. Just weird reading the word Christmas. This is the least Christmassy I feel at this time of year. Early spring pouring with rain. I'm excited to see Guild Wars 2 take on herds of wild Kirin. Actually, yeah, I think you might be onto something. There is this whole thing about how a horse hasn't really appeared properly rendered in-game, and a Kirin is not quite a horse, right? Just as I guess the Pegasus mount is not quite a horse. But when I was capturing that Guild Wars 1 footage for you guys in the Echovald, which I actually did 4 times in the end, by the way, because of crashes. You guys saw it in one video, but I did that path from the Unwaking Waters back towards the Vasberg Armory 4 times. So I've played a lot of the Echovald Forest lately. I've been really struck by seeing the Kirins like patrolling around. In Guild Wars 1, you know, you kind of get these long view distances out far away, and you see the enemy patrols, and you know, there might be a party of Kirin, they're patrolling, it looks like they're herding around. And I could see Guild Wars 2 going for something like this. I really do like as well the variety of the Kirin that are out there. These mossy Kirin or stony Kirin or the Kirin that we saw over in Xingji. They can really play. And again, this isn't like too edgy of a creature. This isn't, and you know, there's not a lot of baggage in terms of lore and story around them. It's the kind of thing I think that ArenaNet would really like to play with, and I could definitely see, for what it's worth, a raptor skin during the End of Dragons era that looks like a Kirin. I mean, come on. If you guys haven't been paying attention, 2 days ago's patch added like a chameleon raptor. They're going crazy with the designs now. They could definitely do a Kirin. And that would be more justification to have them actually in-game. It also makes me wonder a little bit more about the Jackal with like the 9 tails and stuff. We saw with Sunqua Peak, they were reusing mounts as entities. Will we see more of that as the expansion unfolds? They've actually got a ton of different interesting mount skins they could throw in there if it's an efficient way of populating the area with diverse creatures. Next, we've got Helios Legion, who says, I wonder if the Canthan Empire has reverse engineered the Shiroken from studying Shiro's corpse. Shiro's corpse was preserved, and I could see Canthan scholars studying it in an attempt to unlock its secrets and the secrets of the Jade Wind. So yeah, by the end of the story, Shiro's physical body on Tyria is itself like encased in jade, or like becomes jade. They never really explain much. It's a very short beat in the final cutscene that I think a lot of people ignore. And I think that could be a great point of interest for us to go to as far as the expansion is concerned, by the way. But yeah, this idea of the Shiroken, I'm going to give a maybe. The Shiroken to me are a bit like the Afflicted appearing in this expansion. These are really stories from 250 years ago. And I feel like they are stories that have been concluded. Nonetheless, I am a fan of those entities. And I'd love to see some areas of the city that maybe there's been a new outbreak of the plague somehow, or a new strain. And it's not like this all-encompassing thing that eclipses the entire plot of End of Dragons. They've already got enough subject material to get through. But maybe it's like, you know, the story of a meta, or a meta and a few other random events in somewhere else. And then you can actually get some of the Afflicted, some of the Shiroken. People that don't know what the Shiroken are, Again, it's one of these stories of binding a soul into some kind of physical construct so that it will be able to exist on Tyria and do things. In this case, it's kind of a form of thraldom. The big bad guy in the Factions campaign, Shiro, creates these elite guards for himself known as the Shiro Ken. And what he's done is he's taken their souls and bound them to these pieces of armor. There's actually a collectible item that drops randomly around in Guild Wars 1 Factions that you can trade for special stuff. Were they just called soul stones or something, but related to the shuriken? And I like the idea of seeing more of those, especially we were talking about the juggernauts yesterday. We were talking about how the juggernauts feel a bit like the exalted. This is another example, like all of these things, you know, maybe even look at the Masat and the construction of their jade creatures and stuff that maybe the devs can play with. I think the idea of us actually being able to have our own shuriken is a fun one too, and maybe even go into a spec of some kind, as long as it's not like this thrall enslaved kind of idea. You know, it's something consenting to be one of our shuriken. It's something very revenanty, I think. You know, a revenant that is fighting alongside an ally, but it's not loads of allies. It's not like a ritualist like Kala is. It's more specifically about one companion that you get. Kind of like a Rev becoming much closer to a Ranger in terms of having like one good companion that they can do a lot with. Next, we got friggin' Paco, who says, the Oni! Well, here it is, the big one. Christ, I hope they get a good Hydra-style remake on them. I hope to be terrified and excited if they pop up with a distinct howl. Yeah, Oni are absolutely at the top of my list. I really will consider this expansion to have failed in some major way. Maybe a minor way. But in a very tangible way, if they don't put the Oni in. So the Oni are a variety of demon that ambush you, often alone, but sometimes in packs. They were assassins. Don't forget, in Guild Wars 1 Factions campaign was when the assassin profession was added. So these Oni were that profession. They would jump in out of nowhere, deal massive damage, and then the idea is they disappear back into the mists and you couldn't track them. Assassins lurking that you never really knew if you were safe from. And they were this brilliant, like, cool threat. Obviously, as far as the game balance is concerned, usually you just clear them out and kill them. But I don't know, if you were soloing or maybe very specific farms, or when you were starting out, a sudden pop-up of Oni that you weren't expecting could be a really dangerous situation. And they have a very fun, like, gross, scary-looking design. A Guild Wars 2 rework on them would be brilliant. I would actually be very happy to see them go through a complete visual overhaul as well. As cool as they looked in the first game, I'm sure they can do even more interesting demon stuff. As long as they still kind of have this pale skin idea, this kind of alien appearance. Maybe this could start tying into deeper stories beyond the Elder Dragons. If we do go into this place where we're dealing with the mists and demons and stuff like that, this is a perfect time to reintroduce the Oni. I did have a bit of a comment chain yesterday. You guys were talking about the Oni, and someone said, would they really be that scary now that Guild Wars 2 has mounts? So here we got another situation where mounts kind of screw with things. And it was proposed, well, maybe you have the Oni dismount you. You know, think about him, world versus world. Warclaws can dismount each other. What if the Oni, you know, they had a skill in the first game. Most of them had a hex called Scorpion Wire, which meant if you when they teleported in, they'd cast Scorpion Wire on you, and if you ran too far away, then Scorpion Wire would trigger and it would pull you back to the Oni. So it's like, you know, you can't escape. They're gonna gank you and you can't get away. Now, what if the Guild Wars 2 equivalent of Scorpion Wire is some kind of like dismount effect? So you are still threatened by the Oni, and it still means something when they appear. I think the devs can do really a lot. You know, the original commentator mentioning that the Hydra treatment, you know, there was a lot of interesting engine stuff going on with the Hydra. I think they can do that with the Oni too. Already, for example, those enraged bloodstone creatures that appear on some maps, they were introduced around Season 3. In fact, there was some footage on one of these End of Dragons dailies about 2 weeks ago of me actually encountering one. You guys might not realize this, but when one of those spawns, it's kind of a sudden appearance out of nowhere, and there's like a post-processing effect that appears on your screen, and then the big notification in the middle. They can do that kind of stuff with the Oni too. You know, they can like warp your screen and make it feel like, oh god, there's some kind of portal to the mist has opened up. Think about that new, you know, graphical technology that they're using in the Icebrood Saga, where we see the ice portals. Maybe the Oni step forward from those. You know, that the Renegade kind of uses as well. We saw it in the Super Adventure Box a bit. So, oh, by the way, Super Adventure Box coming back super soon. You'll probably see a lot of the background footage on that. So, yeah, I think there's a lot they can do with the Oni. I'm excited to see them do a lot with the Oni. I think we'd be missing out if we didn't get them. I mean, really. Siphon has an interesting idea that I don't think many people are really ever going to ask for, but I like the way that their mind works, just in terms of consistency for the game. They say, I feel like the Mantids are a creature that needs to come back in End of Dragons. They were everywhere in Cantha during factions and felt as much a staple of the expansion as the Afflicted in some ways. I'd love to see what Guild Wars 2 artists could do to make a modern version. So, here's my belief about this. When it came to making prophecies, the devs knew they needed to populate this whole world filled with different creatures, and they had this cool idea where they'd have like a plague, like an infestation of a type of creature, and they invented this idea, the Devourer, basically like a special fantasy scorpion, and they could be used all over the place and pop up all over the place, and it would feel kind of natural, and it works that they're populous because they're like these bug things. And I think that they like what they did with that, with prophecies. When they went to finally adding pre-searing to prophecies, which was really late in the development, they even expanded on the idea of the Devourers and their plague and so on. I think they liked that, and when it came to factions, they wanted to do the same thing. But they didn't want to just do Devourers everywhere again. It's supposed to be a new continent and a new area. So they invented the Mantid. And yeah, they're these kind of flying, bug-like creatures. They're gross. They're everywhere. Nobody's really going to have great, fond memories of fighting them. But I do think they add a lot of tangible substance to that area of the world. And the story was that they were, exploding in population around Guild Wars 1's time. The lore would fit if they're still around all over the place. If they're not actually going to appear in-game, I would at least love references to them. You know, people eating mantid leg stew and stuff like that. So yeah, I actually do think this would be fun to see them come back, even if they're not like a fan favorite in any way. It makes a lot of sense to me that they would be something like, the pocket raptors of this expansion, or as we even saw scarab beetles and stuff in POF, just something that appears a lot and is kind of bug-like. What kind of mechanics the devs could do, I don't know. I'm thinking something Karkery, where maybe they jump on you and they cling to you. That'd be kind of fun. Kane says, I could see the Gaki being a sentient and sometimes friendly race like the Grawl. I think they're one of the most interesting creatures of Cantha, and I would love their lore to be expanded on, but I can see them being low on ArenaNet's priority list due to apparent lack of existing lore and importance. They'll likely suffer the same fate as the Gargoyles did. So I agree with you here. I've mentioned the Gaki on a couple of these videos, specifically because they're kind of an obscure thing, really. They're there in Cantha. And for people that don't know, they're like these woodland goat people that you find largely in the Echovald Forest. There was a selection of elite skills and a selection of special green items that would drop from certain Gaki bosses in late Echovald areas. So some people engage with them on those levels, but generally speaking, they never speak, they never do anything in the story, they're just there. And back in Guild Wars 1, I think, it was easier to create more simplistic designs for enemies with less animations, and especially with the Guild Wars 1 skill system, it was much more simple to have a wide variety of enemies because they would just be using the player skill system, and the devs could put them in. But I agree, even though I mentioned them a couple of times on these videos, I actually don't think that they'll really make it in. I don't think they're necessarily fan favorites. They're only interesting because of their obscurity to a certain degree. And what fun stuff would the devs do with them? Maybe later they can have it, but the other funny thing about them is I don't really see their rig, their skeleton or whatever, the way that they move, working latched onto anything we've already seen. So I do have an idea that maybe in Cantha they'll create a whole new type of enemy, which I'm going to call the hopping enemy. So Cantha also had these hopping vampires and stuff, these kind of bouncy things that moved around on one leg largely, and you could put the Gaki on that. And if they're going to go that far, then yeah, maybe they'll populate a few things. Maybe we'll see the Gaki and the hopping vampires and a few new things all playing with that setup. Maybe a raid boss or something during this era. And that would feel pretty good. But if they're not going to go that far for all of that group, I do think that the Gaki will fall by the wayside. Another thing though, by the way, the Gargoyles kind of did get reasonable treatment at this point. There are Gargoyles on Tyria, defending cool and interesting places in Path of Fire. There's that amazing tomb dynamic event in Vabi that you can play through, and there's gargoyles all over there, not to mention the ones at Halloween. Yeah, they're different than the ones in Guild Wars 1, and I don't think they're quite as cool, but I don't really think that the gargoyles got shafted anymore. It was just a bit of a weird non-mystery in the end, what with the inclusion on the timeline and that weird dialogue at the Black Citadel. I'm sure far too few people know what the hell I'm talking about right now. Maybe you could watch my Guild Wars 2 mysteries on it if you like. But I'll just move on. Next, we've got North Stars, who says, while this may not be the most exciting enemy to return to for End of Dragons, I wonder what they'll do, if they'll do anything with the Yetis, sorry. They're very Jotun-esque, and they could drop some hints that they're related to the Jotun in some way. And if they go the way of the Hydra, I could definitely see them get an amazing recreation as a towering enemy in End of Dragons. So, as I was just talking about, the idea of like having tangible existing creatures that you can sort of map new creatures onto, I think the Yeti are a very high likelihood. Why? Because you could just have them be giants in a similar way to how we had like desert giants in POF that just kind of feel a lot like the giants we already had elsewhere in the game, right? Yeah, just have Yeti and just kind of remodel and reskin those giants and have them use all those animations and kind of combat abilities. It works perfectly, doesn't it? I really want to see the Yetis. I really want to see a lot of mountainy environments. One thing I'm especially hoping from with End of Dragons is not just a map per all the Guild Wars 1 regions that we get to revisit them. You know, one map on the Jade Sea sounds a bit lame to me. I kind of want more than that. One map in the Echo Forest you know, I want more. But the other thing people really have to recognize is the amount of space we actually got to travel in the first game was really limited. And largely it was limited because you didn't really explore any of the mountains that were on the world map. And the mountains are everywhere. So if they're going to do big mountain stuff, take us beyond those borders a bit, kind of like the Sandswept Isles did in Season 4, then they got to do a lot of Yeti, right? I would love to see these guys. Yeti were one of these really rare old minis as well that I used to fawn over, you know, that you could only get from magazine codes in the original game. Kind of made me a big fan of them in some ways. So yeah, I'm all for them. So that's it for the creatures for now. Please feel free to keep dropping your messages. Let's just do some miscellaneous stuff thrown in there as well. I kind of want to do a bit of a grab bag tomorrow. Any kind of lore or whatever that's just been on your mind, something maybe that I missed from a few videos ago, you guys can drop those comments. I do have one last thing here as well from Cot, who says, WP, can you stream you playing Final Fantasy 14? I'd love to see that. I mean, I'd love to see you figure things out and your reaction as you learn them. You do not have to be good at the game. Yeah, because I mentioned this on End of Dragons Daily recently. I have been talking about Final Fantasy 14 a lot because I've been learning a lot about just MMOs and how these corporations just almost like soullessly pilfer features and ideas from one another. It's on my mind a lot, and I'm playing the game a good amount at the moment. So yes, you might see it on a stream at some point. I'm definitely talking about it a lot there. I'd be putting it as background footage on these as well, but this show really is you know, it's about a Guild Wars 2 expansion. If I pick up more episodes of The Floor, which can be about more general gaming stuff, you could see some of my gameplay there as well. So it's on my mind, and a few people asked this, which is why I'm actually spotlighting this here for you all. And, you know, it gets good visibility. We're here daily, at least. So there you go, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Drop your comments down below, and I'll be back for another one tomorrow. In the meantime, feel free to check out whatever playlist I'm about to link on the end slate. Probably Ghost of Ascalon audiobook. I really want to get the views up on that so that I can justify doing the next book. See you guys next time.